Hello, everyone out there in Radio Land. It's that time of the week. What time of the week is it? Well, it's that very special time of the week where we come onto your radios or perhaps your internet web streams, and we give you the straight-up truth. We dig underneath the mainstream media's capitalist propaganda and find those veins of that rich, sweet truth with a capital T, and we dig it on up for your listening pleasure. Or, I don't know if I'd even say pleasure so much, just to keep the community informed, because honestly, a lot of it is pretty bad news, you know? But we are the only place you can catch that sort of deft left-wing analysis at the national, international, statewide, and extremely local level. That's right, it's the Hoodrat Strategist radio program. As always, the following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 FM WIDR Kalamazoo or Western Michigan University, no matter how dope or insightful they may turn out to be. Some of y'all out there, you might be a little excited, a little happy. New Deal Grandpa did win in New Hampshire last night. Again, we'll be keeping a close eye on the primaries. We do have a couple of stories later on. Eyes are kind of turning towards Nevada and South Carolina right now. And there's a couple of points of potential shenanigans going on in Nevada, which could have a profound effect on what we've witnessed on caucus day down there. So we'll be bringing you those stories later on. I'm going to be I might be flying solo this episode. We will just have to wait and see. But let's ground it. Let's start with something on the local level here, and I think this is particularly important. And this is a newer story that I'm touching on. It was published 2 days ago, but then I'm going to follow it up with something that I think is kind of relevant, given the context of this story here. So this first one we're going to talk about, it's kind of a follow-up to what we've been talking about on the show since last winter. The suspension of the free bus ride program for a lot of Kalamazoo public school students. That has been reinstated since then. And we're going to give you an update on this. That's basically something related to it. But this story has implications not just for students, but anybody who rides the bus downtown, including myself. This story, it was published February 10th. It is called Kalamazoo County Sheriff's Office Takes Over Security at Bus Station. This is written by Kayla Miller. Again, published just a couple of days ago. I'm going to go ahead and read from the article, and then I'm going to kind of dive in a little bit more about the local context here, give you some important thoughts. A new agreement with the Sheriff's Office for Police Services at the Transportation Center was approved at a meeting Monday, February 10th, by the Kalamazoo County and Central County Transportation Authorities. The new agreement was needed after the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety, and that's our normal police department, terminated its contract effective Sunday, February 9th, according to the recommendation to the board from Metro Executive Director Sean McBride. Exactly when deputies will begin patrolling at the center is still under negotiation because the sheriff's office is understaffed and needs to recruit deputies for the positions, McBride said. During the transition, Metro will expand the use of the private security company Security Plus, McBride said. Not all details of the agreement are finalized due to the condensed time period and fluidity of the situation, the recommendation added. Discussions with the sheriff's office began in November for the sheriff to supply 2 deputies to the transportation center. The hours of coverage have not yet been finalized, but would be comparable to what the city provided previously, McBride said. The term of the drafted agreement runs through December 31st, 2022. Metro will pay the sheriff's office no more than $245,000 during the first full year of service. Rate is based on the actual cost attributed to the sheriff's deputy and is the same rate the other jurisdictions, such as Comstock and Oshtemo Townships, pay for contracted services according to the recommendation presented to board members. So let me cut in real quick and kind of run this out. A lot of that is just kind of some dry figures. For those who don't know, there were some incidents down at the Kalamazoo Metro bus station. There was basic police harassment and assaults of some teenagers, black teenagers specifically, which caused a bit of an uproar in the community. Specifically, it seemed like it was a use of excessive force. Excuse me. And that really put the Kalamazoo Public Safety Department under a whole lot of scrutiny. This was around the time that a lot of dubious claims were being made by the school board about fights or violence on the bus, which statistically, when you actually looked at the data, didn't really represent that much of a dramatic uptick in unruly or assault behavior on the Kalamazoo City buses. But nonetheless, the free school bus program, which operates between the hours 2 to 4 p.m. for high school students, was suspended. So this is kind of a response. This is the Metro Transit kind of responding to people from the community who noticed police brutality and kind of wanted an alternative. And I will say, as far as is the sheriff's department better? Well, that's a good question. I'm actually going to expand that again later in the article, later on, probably when I get done reading the article. It's actually going to depend a lot on what happens in this election year. But let me go ahead and go down, and I'm going to continue reading from the article. The Kalamazoo County Authority was created in 2006 to provide countywide Metro Connect and Metro Share van services within Kalamazoo County. Central County Authority was created in 2014 to manage and operate the services of Metro within the urbanized area. Sheriff Rick Fuller said the cost of Metro could be raised based on salary increases for the officers. Fuller told the board that his office is recruiting deputies much like other agencies in Michigan who are struggling to find police officers. Kalamazoo County Sheriff's Office has 11 unfilled positions currently, Fuller said, and the process to get deputies at the center downtown could take 6 months. During the transition, Security Plus will be on site from 10 a.m. to 12:30 a.m. Monday through Friday, 1 p.m. through 11 p.m. on Saturdays, and 1 p.m. through 7 p.m. on Sundays. Also during the meeting, McBride updated the board on changes to the Youth Mobility Fund, which is what I was referencing earlier, for the high school students getting free rides. A restriction on the time when students were allowed to ride for free was lifted Monday, February 3rd. It was originally implemented in December because of the behavioral issues and overcapacity at certain times of the day. Since the restriction was lifted, 1,661 students have used their pass, and Metro has not experienced any behavioral issues on the buses or at the transportation center, McBride said. For the month of January, 14,897 students used their pass, bringing the total number of KPS rides since the program started to 116,486. So, going back, I gave you a little bit broader context than what the article really lays out. But, this transition to having a sheriff's department, also having, Security Plus there, what we have seen, independent security agencies. Now, typically when we talk on the show, we don't really like giving props to privatization and such. I do think, though, when we're talking about something like this, it's not necessarily a bad thing. A mall security guard or security guard at the bus station is going to have a different way of approaching interaction with the public than a police officer would. Again, a security guard is more to... they are there to keep the peace and de-escalate people. Whereas a lot of police officers are not necessarily trained on that. And when we're talking about institutional bias, let us not forget, it was just a few short years ago, around about 5 years ago, that a study showed that our public safety department was more institutionally racist than Ferguson, Missouri. To the extent that substantial changes were made. A few changes were made around the edges, but a lot of that same crop of officers still remains on active duty. Now, the question then becomes, so this Security Plus agency, they're a little bit more accountable because, they have their contract is kind of directly tied in with Metro Transit, Kalamazoo Public Safety. They are accountable to the city in the sense that the city can kind of come down on them if some real heinous stuff comes down, but that remains to be seen. But these security officers, they are basically at the behest of both Metro Transit and I think to a lesser degree the Sheriff's Department until they find these deputies. Under the current administration, the Kalamazoo County Sheriff's Department, we have Richard Fuller, who, so I'll say this, I've been very unhappy with Sheriff Fuller. Granted, I'm a radical lefty, so I don't think there should be police at all, but to the extent that, police are a reality of under capitalism, particularly he's dragged his feet on, being, protecting the immigrant community here in Kalamazoo. It took months and months and months to officially declare that he was going to do ICE holds, and then about 8 months later, he went back on that, and somebody from Kalamazoo was transferred over to ICE. So not a very good record on immigration. Does kind of pass himself as he is deeply involved with like the local Democratic Party, so on and so forth. So there are times where I've seen him be very compassionate, reasonable. Times where I've seen him repeating a lot of right-wing talking points. Now, I never got a chance to bring up this article when it first dropped, but I think this brings some very important context into this whole situation where the Sheriff's Department is going to have this contract until at least 2022 to run security at the bus station. For those of you who may remember, Thomas Swafford ran back in 2016, tried to unseat Richard Fuller, and this time, instead of primarying him, Swafford has decided to run as a Republican. Which, by the way, something that's kind of funny, like he says in this article, prior to 2016, I didn't really have a lot of political knowledge. And in 2016, when I wanted to run, I wanted to, for lack of a better word, remove Sheriff Richard Fuller. And I thought the best way to go about that was as a Democrat, Swafford said. I don't know if I think that says something about the two-party system more than anything else. That I don't know, they're both kind of similar. I'll just switch to the other one this time. And what's interesting to me, and granted, we'll try to bring Swafford onto the show, interview him as it gets closer to election time. But this is somebody I remember having a conversation with him back in 2016 about having like Narcan kits on hand in the local jails, and he was about it at the time. So it seemed like he was at least like kind of human centered to an extent, but. And I don't know, maybe this also aligns with his lack of political knowledge, but he has been touting and kind of showing off his endorsement from former Wisconsin Sheriff David Clarke. Oh, who listens to this show and maybe you had kind of like an automatic reaction to that. David Clarke, not a nice dude. For those of you who don't know, David Clarke, this is a guy who was basically so outrageous and far left, or far right, sorry, not he's not left at all, my bad, that he was no longer allowed to be a commentator on Fox News. I kid you not. He basically got canned from those sorts of duties around 2018 for saying things that were too outlandish. Again, too outlandish for Fox News. He's also just said a lot of really outrageous stuff. He's referred to Black Lives Matter as a hate group, as a terrorist organization. He suggested that they will team up with ISIS at some point down the road. By the way, so David Clarke also is he's a black conservative. That is worth. I think that is worth bringing up just to understand like kind of the weird dimensions of this. He said, referring to Black Lives Matter, he's called it a conglomeration of misfits. You have Occupy movement, you have organized labor in on it now, you have criminals, you have black racialists, you have cop haters and anarchists have now formed together this faux movement, if you will. It sounds like something you'd see on InfoWars or Breitbart. It doesn't stop there. He goes on to say, and again, this is just completely not in tune with reality. Right. Hold on just a second. I need to check something. Sorry about that, folks. I just had a brain fart moment. I wanted to make sure that I was like, oh, did I had one of those did I leave the stove on moments, except it was recording the show. And you know what? Guess what? I did. So, yeah, it'll be a goofy moment if you're listening to this later on, I suppose. Anyway, David Clarke also engages in just some fake news, just demonstrably false statements. This is a good example. First off, there is no police brutality in America. We ended that back in the 60s. There's a new Harvard study out there that shows that there is no racism in the hearts of police officers. They go about their daily duty, if you will, to keep communities safe. Now, I'm not sure which study that he's referencing. I think that's a little silly to say that a study could prove what is in the hearts and minds of anyone. You can get opinions. You can't actually get inside their head. Maybe I'm being a little too specific there, but no, the fact of the matter is there's been tons and tons and tons and tons of evidence showing the exact opposite. Police brutality has kind of gone up and down over the years, but it's remained pretty consistent since the 1960s. Just the idea that there's been no police brutality since the civil rights movement is just absolutely ridiculous. And in addition to having these very draconian views about Black Lives Matter, he's also gone down a lot of conspiracy pathways. And this might be part of the reason he was pulled off Fox News, but he went on to say that, like, the Parkland shooting, he believed it was a hoax, or that the kids who kind of got March for Our Lives started were being paid off by George Soros, so on and so forth. So David Clarke is somebody who's so radically right-wing that he was disowned by the Trump administration and Fox News. But you're going to come into this community trying to unseat Sheriff Fuller with that man's endorsement. Thomas Swafford, maybe you should, I would say he needs to upgrade his political knowledge at least a little bit, because, this is not somebody whose endorsement you should be touting at all. I will reference this article. If you want to read into it more, again, it talks a little bit more about Swafford, and not only that, but I'm kind of irritated with M Live because they kind of posted this they wrote this article at face value, and it seems like they didn't even look into who David Clarke was, or at least all of the stuff in the article about him is positive or neutral. When this is a man who's literally been disowned by the proto-fascist right wing of American politics for being too crazy and right wing. So how does that tie back to the story I was at first talking about? Well, the big thing with that is, knowing that we're now going to have sheriff's deputies down at the Metro bus station. And the impetus for that was because of perceived, or not perceived, but actual police brutality down at the bus station, and racial bias, that literally happened. Do we really want a sheriff who's endorsed by somebody like David Clarke, who thinks Black Lives Matter is a bunch of nonsense? I think the short answer to that is no. No, we do not. Of course, please make up your own mind. But if you want to check that out, former Wisconsin sheriff, regular Fox News guest, endorses Kalamazoo County candidate. That's on M Live, and it was published January 15th. So I think with that, we're going to go ahead and take a little break. Y'all are listening to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
Maybe I'm wrong on this one, but for me, the beast doesn't include selling out.
Garth, you know what I'm talking about, right?
It's like people only do things because they get paid. And that's just really sad.
I can't talk about it anymore. It's giving me a headache.
Here, take 2 of these.
Oh, WIDR-FM, Kalamazoo. Radio Evolution.
Look, you can stay here in the big leagues and play by the rules, or you can go back to the farm club in Aurora. It's your choice.
Yes, and it's the choice of a new generation.
Depression can take many forms. It can feel like static in your brain, or as if everything around you has lost meaning. It can debilitate even the strongest of people. 89.1 WIDR is here to tell you that there is help and a way to improve mental health. WMU offers counseling for all students in the greater Kalamazoo community at Synecu's Health Center. There is no need for an appointment for first-time visits. Open counseling times are Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Friday from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. or Thursday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Synecu's is located at 1903 West Michigan Avenue, Kalamazoo. For more information, please call 269-387-3287 or visit www.wmich.edu/health center.
Hello, everyone. We are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. So we've got some more local, some statewide coverage coming up for you later. But I did want to highlight something that I thought was really important. So I'm going to be giving my voice to rest here in just a couple of minutes. And I think Lawrence will be coming by later. I'm sure we'll, definitely be digging into primary stuff in some explicit detail. But at the moment, I wanted to highlight, one of the things that's we've seen, this primary thus far has changed people's expectations a little bit. We had front runners who are running quite far to the back, much farther to the back than perhaps they originally thought. I'm thinking a lot of Joe Biden. We're seeing that the election itself is a bit more fluid. A lot of people thought it was just going to be Joe, Warren, and Bernie kind of vying in the top three for the nomination. As we see, Warren's a little vulnerable. She seems to be bouncing between third and fourth place. In this particular primary, the New Hampshire one, she didn't even break the bottom floor limit to get any delegates for the national convention. Instead, Amy Klobuchar actually did really well. But probably the biggest surprise is that Pete Buttigieg has emerged. It's kind of like the third way standard bearer. Everybody kind of thought this would probably be a role that would be filled by Joe Biden or perhaps even Amy Klobuchar in her own right. But what is perhaps really surprising about Peter Buttigieg is that, we've reported on him from the get-go. We've done our analyses of the various candidates, their strengths and weaknesses, and that includes everyone from New Deal Grandpa on down. And yeah, it does surprise me that he's the breakout candidate of the primary season. Now, there are, of course, some dubious things going on with Mr. Buttigieg. The app from the Iowa caucus. We've got a story coming up later on. We're going to tell you about some obvious conflicts of interest going on in Nevada. There's been a lot of jokes going around the internet about his ties. He's LGBTQIA. And there, the possibility that, there's some sort of malfeasance going on that's pumping up his numbers, which we did literally see in Iowa. As far as I can tell, everything was above course in New Hampshire. I haven't heard any stories about shenanigans from that area. I mean, granted, it was just yesterday, so we'll have to wait and see. But what distresses me, I guess, about Pete Buttigieg is that this is a guy who, one, I don't think he would fare well in an election against Trump. He would put the president in a very interesting position where he could actually attack Pete from the left on racial issues, which, and why do I say that? Because he has been garbage down in South Bend to the African-American community on both an economic and social level. There is a reason, I would say, that the black community is not a fan of him. It's not even like Bloomberg, who has a long history, as we'll discuss later. He's pretty racist himself, but Pete's got a very short resume, Mayor South Bend. And you know what? Here's the thing. If he was a really awesome mayor and he was just doing a great job and he was like signifying what you would want in a progressive Democratic candidate, then maybe I could get along with it. But from what we've seen, he's been not only very centrist on policies, but a definite racial discriminatory history. I would not just call it a blind spot. I think that's far too kind. From what we've seen, the stories we've talked about, it seems very it repeats. It's systemic. This man who, the sheriff, former sheriff in South Bend, a black sheriff, stepped forward to expose racism in the department, and Pete Buttigieg's response was to fire that black sheriff. But you don't need to hear it from me. I think you've heard it from me and the co-hosts, for a long time. So I wanted to play a clip from Democracy Now! Tonight, where we go straight to the horse's mouth, the people's mouth. It's somebody who's on the South Bend, city council, or maybe city commission. I can't remember what nomenclature they use down there. It really grills me that, again, we have this guy who is running neck to neck with Bernie Sanders, who doesn't have a lot of experience, and the experience he does have is garbage. He has an experience of screwing people over. And yet, he's this brilliant third way guy that we're all supposed to pay attention to, because I guess MSNBC says so. I think people have more of a responsibility to do homework about these candidates, man. Like, don't just go out because this guy talks real good and he's smart. Smart people can make awful, evil decisions. I'm just gonna say one other last thing before we play the clip. I was thinking about, it seems really just unjust at a surface level that both Cory Booker and Kamala Harris dropped out of this race before Pete Buttigieg, and he's now polling number 2 in the country. His polling numbers are terrible, but his wins, he's like number 2. I guess number 1 in delegates, number 2 in the popular votes. I'm trying to figure out how that works. Because, we've deep dove into both of those candidates and their problems, but if you're going to have a centrist third way candidate, I think it says a lot about white entitlement that both Cory Booker and Kamala Harris had a lot more experience in their tank. Again, a lot of their policies I did not like. A lot of their experience I did not like. But compared to Pete Buttigieg, they had a lot more just experience overall, a lot more positive experience, actually getting some good things done. And yet, both of them had to drop out before the Iowa caucus. And yet, Mayo Buttigieg, gets to get the centrist crown and possibly try to be the centrist standard bearer until he tanks, and then the DNC flips the Bloomberg lever as their last ditch to stop Bernard Sanders. But I digress. I'm just saying, if that's not an example of white privilege, I don't know what it is. What is a corrupt, unqualified, centrist white guy versus 2 corrupt but very qualified black folks who could have easily took that centrist mantle. But anyway, let's go ahead. We're going to play this clip. This is from a South Bend politician who was on Democracy Spring earlier today.
All right, folks, it's time for more. One day as a child, I was pulled into a portal.
Now, to look at other police policies in other parts of the country, to look at Pete Buttigieg's record on policing and racial justice following his second-place finish in New Hampshire last night. The former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, has surprised many with his strong showings in Iowa and New Hampshire, 2 of the country's whitest states. But as the race moves on now to Nevada and South Carolina, Buttigieg continues to poll extremely low with African-American voters. His own former constituents are condemning his treatment of the black community in South Bend during his time as mayor, calling out systemic racism in the police force. During Buttigieg's tenure as mayor from 2012 to 18, black residents were 4.3 times more likely to be arrested for possessing marijuana than white people. At last week's presidential debate, ABC News moderator Lindsay Davis questioned Pete Buttigieg about the rise in arrests of black people under his administration.
Well, the reality is, on my watch, drug arrests in South Bend were lower than the national average. The overall rate was lower.
No, there was an increase. The year before you were in office, it was lower. Once you became in office in 2012, that number went up. In 2018, the last year that we have a record for, that number was still up.
Yep. And one of the strategies that our community adopted was to target when there were cases where there was gun violence and gang violence, which was slaughtering so many in our community.
Well, for more, we go to Chicago, where we're joined by Henry Davis Jr., a South Bend City Council member since 2008. Welcome to Democracy Now!, Henry Davis Jr. Can you talk about your experience as a City Council member with your mayor at the time? He just recently stepped down, Pete Buttigieg, who's now just placed second in the New Hampshire primary.
Well, thank you for having me. My time working with Mayor Buttigieg was, at best, was contentious. It was very difficult to get across to him and also to his administration how African Americans were living in South Bend and some of the issues that confronted them on a daily basis. You're talking about double-digit unemployment. You're talking about a very high poverty rate, over 40%. You're talking about high crime. You're talking about schools shutting down and closing. And even some of his policies when it came to 1,000 houses, 1,000 days program, when he decided to go through the hood or, in the black and brown areas, and he wanted to demolish those homes. And the homes were demolished, but it wasn't the fact that some of those homes didn't need to come down. It was the fact that there was no affordable housing program that came behind it. And so now we're still dealing with, empty lots, high weeds, and a lot of varmints that are living in those empty lots. And so you're talking about right now, even with the police force, you have the lowest number serving of African American officers in the police force in South Bend. So, there were a number of issues that confronted the African American community and that he really chose not to deal with. And so as a councilman and having a predominantly black district, a lot of those, fights were held and had on the council floor. And I did as much as I could to satisfy the residents and the constituencies, but it was very hard going back and forth and not getting that money invested back into the community like it should have been. And so here we are now, dealing with a presidential idea of a Pete Buttigieg, and even back in South Bend, how do we correct some of these social ills in its environment? African Americans. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I wanted to say the whole country learned about the murder of Eric Logan, a black South Bend resident who was shot and killed by white police officer Ryan O'Neal because, of course, at the time, Mayor Pete Buttigieg was running for president. Can you talk about how he handled that and also about the firing of the first black police chief, Darrell Boykins?
Well, just like I just talked about, he didn't handle it. And if he did handle it, it was a fumble. Eric Logan was a combination of events that took place since he took office back in 2012. Right after he took office, there was a young man by the name of Michael Anderson that ended up dying under suspicious circumstances with the South Bend Police Department. There was another young man named Deshaun Franklin who happened to be sleeping in his home, and he was attacked and brutally beaten up by South Bend Police. And, none of those officers were even disciplined. Then you had Eric Logan, and a lot of things happened in between there as well. But then you have Eric Logan who died, at the end of a gun, And so we, it just has not been a good ride. South Bend needs a do-over. And this is like, the things that has happened right now with the Democratic Party as a whole. Blacks, African Americans is the backbone of the Democratic Party. And we desire good schools. We desire safe neighborhoods. We desire good jobs. We desire the same thing that most people desire and need and want to live in America. And if we're planning on beating a Donald Trump, this coming November, We have to have a organized and unified attack that's going to make sure that there's a candidate out in front that's going to be interested in making sure that we not only vote, but those things that we're voting for are going to happen. And right now, you have a slate of candidates. They're everywhere. They're not talking about the hardcore issues that you would talk about at your kitchen table, at your local diner, or even at church. They're not talking about those things. They're talking about just a lot of different wild ideas on how this is supposed to work. This is not a student council race. This is for the presidency of the United States of America. This is the rule of the free world. And African Americans are Americans. And we desire to have our priorities as a part of someone's platform.
I wanted to bring Barbara Smith, the feminist scholar, back into this conversation. And as you're listening to these two examples, looking at Bloomberg, looking at Buttigieg, your thoughts?
Hi, aren't they? I think that they always say this is the most important election of our lifetime, but given what's in the White House at this point, and given what's going on in our nation, we really have to be very, very alert, and we really need to look at the candidates and figure out which one of them is capable. And obviously, the things that were just discussed about two of the candidates, as far as I'm concerned, that makes them unelectable. Because another racist in the White House, that's just like a little too much to bear. I think that we do have a candidate who deals with bread and butter issues, and that's why I'm supporting Bernie Sanders.
Henry Davis Jr., if you could talk about, I guess the population of South Bend is something like, it's more than a quarter African American. In the last minute that we have you been surprised at the rise of your former mayor, of Pete Buttigieg, from South Bend mayor and all the controversies that were there at the time, to now being one of the front runners for president in the United States?
I'm absolutely surprised by the rise. There's an expectation of presidential, but there's also something that needs to go behind that and something to support it, and that means a resume and some real life things that have occurred. Biden took a text out on Mayo Pete, recently this past week, and talked about his lack of experience. And although those things probably were pretty hardcore, the truth is that we expect that we're going to have a president that has some support from the rest of the U.S. Senate, some support from the rest of the U.S. Congress, but not only that, but have some real life experience at trying to be or being a president or being something that is more than a mayor. And so we desire somebody there that is going to be able to, day one, take over the reins and try to correct some of the things that Donald Trump has, stepped on and hurt us with.
We're going to have to leave it there. Henry Davis Jr., thank you so much, as well as Barbara Smith. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.
So again, that was Democracy Now! Interviewing Henry Davis Jr., who's a councilman on the city council over in South Bend, talking about his former mayor and some of the issues that he had with them and the community had. And really, I think the biggest takeaway was, he went on to say that Mayo Pete really did not listen to the black community in South Bend. And I do believe I hear somebody knocking on the door. Give me just a sec.
had to arrest black
we're
people.
We're back. Yeah. So I got Lawrence joining me right now, and I think this is actually a good moment because I was about to transition to primary discussion.
Yeah, what up?
Yeah. So again, we just played that clip from Democracy Now! About, Henry Davis Jr. talking about his experience working with, Mayo Pete.
Doc, you talking about Wall Street Pete?
Wall Street Pete.
Doc, he got booed. How do you get booed at
your own rally?
You got booed at your own rally.
Well,
he
mentioned, specifically, he made fun of Bernie's political revolution and then subsequently was booed.
Doc, he got booed and got called Wall Street Pete by Democrats. Mm-hmm. And that should tell you something. Like, dog, it's already bad enough that you say nothing, that you literally say nothing and then you retweet it like it's the most amazing thing in the world. Like, I like the fact that to shout out to the Young Turks, they said Mayor Pete is an algorithm of political speeches, of like political talk from like Obama, Mitt Romney, and other people, and he's a mashup of that with neoliberal substance.
I haven't clicked on it yet, but somebody shared with me earlier. It's like a create your own Mayor Pete platitude speech.
Oh my god!
And it just automatically generates a bunch of eloquent nonsense. Is probably the best way I can describe what Pete Buttigieg puts out. So I mean, you heard a great example of it. Was responding when the debate moderator asked him that hard-hitting question about his record.
Wait,
it was the perfect nonsense answer.
Wait. Even before we get to his non-answer and the response to the shout out to the reporter who did the follow-up question. His non-answer was ridiculous. But remember, he said something I think earlier in that debate that was like, I'm paraphrasing. He said something like, the shape of our democracy is the thing that is the... What did he say? No, I'll pull it up.
The shape?
He said the shape of our democracy is the most important thing in our democracy. And it's like, what does that mean?
What? Yeah, I know what you're saying, and like you basically paraphrased it, but that's essentially what he said. It's like, what the shape?
No. He said the shape of our here's the quote because I'm pulling it up. Is he said the shape of our democracy is the issue that affects every issue.
That straight up sounds like. Everybody remember that Simpsons Halloween episode where King and Kodos take Bob Dole and Bill Clinton's bodies, and like they're on the debate stage. It's like, America must move forward, not backward, up, not down, free T-shirts for everyone, and everyone's like, yeah.
It's like the Family Guy episode when Lois runs for office and all she says is 9/11 and the crowd goes wild. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like he's like that. He also said something like, we must meet this moment, and we must meet this moment. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't say well he's going to meet the moment with a policy. He just says we shall meet this moment. It's like, are we going to meet this moment in the future? Like, are we meeting this moment to go on a date? Like, well, like what does that mean? Like, it's after.
I think I know what it means. So Pete Buttigieg is like that dorky kid who thought that he was gonna go on a prom date with his crush, and then he shows up, and then this really nice, awesome person named the Working Class shows up instead, and ends up taking them to the prom instead. And then Pete Buttigieg is just mad about it, and he probably plans some sort of plot.
Are you kidding me? I know. Doug, Pete Buttigieg is Kylo Ren from Star Wars. His dad was a Marxist-Leninist who was best friends with Dr. Cornel West.
Yeah, fun fact.
You know what I'm saying?
He and Pete Buttigieg's dad translated the works of Antonio Gramsci, who he was the first Marxist to talk about like cultural hegemony, like basically how you can get the working class to believe in centrist nonsense, which is it's funny because it's like, Father,
even
can
though
you tell me how that works?
Because Dr. Cornel West talked about it recently. Like he talked about how he's known Mayor Pete ever since he was in diapers, and and how when Mayor Pete was running, he told Mayor Pete to his face, he said, "Dog, I love you. You still family. I ain't supporting you, brother."
No.
He was like, "You part of the neoliberal establishment that I've been fighting against." Like, I was sitting there like, I'm like, that hurts. That, and then watching that Democracy Now! Clip, that gave me so much life.
You know, something interesting too, like Kamala's dad was also a Marxist, so I'm just gotta say, like, Marxist, raise your kids better, man. Spend some more time with your kids.
Nah, dog.
Going down the dark path, man.
Nah, dog. That's what happens when you become a rank careerist, dog.
Yeah.
But okay, so to get back to the debate, because I wanted to talk about the debate as a whole. Well, outside of that, I do have to say a few things before we get to the debate. Because New Hampshire did happen. Andrew Yang dropped out, and I was sad about that. Even though Andrew Yang was basically he was a libertarian Democrat in many aspects, he did have some really good policies. He talked about democracy dollars. It wasn't as good as Christian Gillibrand's democracy dollars, but he was one of the only few people who talked about that. That was also good.
I will say, even though I had a lot of criticisms about how he wanted to do UBI, I am very glad that it's now part of the conversation. I think, like,
Hawaii's done it. Hawaii's one of the few states who actually has UBI, and it's one of the few 50 states that have UBI. So it's not like we don't have that policy. And also, if you look at it at its bare minimums, Social Security is UBI.
It is, yeah.
Social Security, when you look at it, it's how it functions. Social Security is UBI, but except you don't have to be 65 to get it. Every American would get it. I like the fact that he outflanked Bernie and other people. Him and Tulsi Gabbard outflanked people on their left for wanting to legalize all drugs. I'm like, yo, fantastic. Now, some of the other stuff that he supported, I didn't support. He didn't support universal free college and tuition. He didn't support universal basic. He didn't support universal health care.
And that's the important thing. It's like, because other, like, kind of right-wing libertarian people too have pushed that too, like, have UBI instead of, robust social services. And it's like, you can't do that. You have to do both. Like, it's like,
I think, and I do also have to say the fact that Tulsi and Yang before New Hampshire did have like some meetings with the Bernie coalition says a lot. So I'm hoping that Yang will come out and endorse Bernie. I'm hoping that if Tulsi drops, she will also endorse Bernie. If Warren doesn't get third or second place in Nevada, that's going to look ugly. I've said it on my Facebook page time and time again. I don't think Joe Biden's going to make it to Super Tuesday. If Joe doesn't get second or third in Nevada, and if he doesn't get second or third in South Carolina,
I was thinking like he's looking at South Carolina as his comeback moment.
Dog, I don't think. Here's the thing: if we're looking at the change in policies nationally and stuff, and if we're looking at the demographic polls nationally, dog, he's looking like he might mess around and get fourth in South Carolina.
Yeah, and from what I'm seeing, Bloomberg seems to be doing pretty well among like low information voters, and
Steyer and Bloomberg are both doing very well with low information voters in some of the upcoming states.
Yep.
But yeah, you said you wanted to talk about that.
Well,
do you want to play the clip of him answering?
Yeah, let's talk about Bloomberg first. I do have some. There's a couple stories in Nevada that I think are kind of tied together, but let's talk about Bloomberg.
No. I was talking about the Mayor Pete non-answer.
Oh. Well, I mean, it goes right back into his. I think that's just going to be his modus operandi. Like, watch the way that he talks about issues, especially when he's challenged. And he just, again, he didn't answer the question. He just
okay. So the answer was, the question was, Mayor Pete, you ran South Bend. When you came into South Bend, arrest rates. Before you became mayor, arrest rates were down. When you became mayor, not only did arrest rates go up, they stayed up. What is your response? And his response was, systematic racism is a problem, and it was also a problem in my town. And I want to encourage everyone to try to fix these problems. Even though when I was mayor, I helped contribute to these problems, and I did not fix them. That was basically his first answer. The follow-up question was, Mayor Pete, your record shows that when you were in office, arrest rates went up and they stayed up afterwards. You did not fix this problem when you were mayor. Why? And he basically said, well, when black people were doing bad things, I had the police arrest them, and they were part of the gang unit. So we had to arrest more black people to save black people. I'm paraphrasing. Yeah. I'm paraphrasing, but not by much. He literally basically said we had to he established a task force to target gangs and all this other stuff. He was basically saying we had to arrest black people to save black people. And it's funny because my nephew was watching the Boondocks while the debate was going on, and he was watching the Uncle Ruckus episode where he becomes a pastor, and when Uncle Ruckus said you have to hate thyself to save thyself, I'm like, did Mayor Pete steal that line from Uncle Ruckus? What is going on?
Also kind of sounds like something David Clarke would think.
It is. It's funny because it's a right-wing talking point, and since we were talking about Bloomberg, and I'm glad that we're going to show this clip next. It's the exact same kind of logic that Bloomberg uses to justify stop and frisk and harassing black folks. Okay, so
I think this is important to talk about in context too, because I think it is worth noting that Buttigieg's numbers with anybody who is not white and old are really like in the gutter.
It is. He is when it comes to black support when it comes to Buttigieg's support in the black community, he's at 4%. And Amy Klobuchar is at 2%.
Yeah, I think like a lot of it is just like, well, I mean, look at the guy, and 2, he does not pass the smell test for any of anybody who's been doing even a basic amount of election research will stumble upon this stuff. But
I do need to give some clarity to this clip that we're about to play. Yeah. So, but continue.
I think the flip side of that, though, is that Bloomberg, according to like some of the similar polling, is actually doing fairly well. He's making headway with black voters.
But he's doing it because 1, he has not been challenged, and 2, he has spent.
You cannot go anywhere.
He has spent.
You are not safe from his ads,
dog. Yeah. He has spent $300K. And more. He spent 300 mil. He spent 300 mil on advertising alone.
And if you watch these ads, it paints a picture of a guy who seems pretty nice and progressive, right?
He even has this ad where it sounds like Obama endorsed him. It's a disgusting ad.
I've seen that one.
It's so disgusting because
I've seen that one too many times at the gym.
I'm like, Obama didn't endorse you.
No,
Obama doesn't like you. What are you doing?
It's like Obama's not even gonna endorse his problematic BFF. I don't think he's gonna endorse.
Okay, so I need to preface this. Right? So Benjamin Dixon. Shout out to Benjamin Dixon, the Benjamin Dixon Show on YouTube. Shout out to that black brother. That brother is doing the Lord's work. Shout out to him. He was doing, just like Sean King, who will be in Kalamazoo, I think in April. He will, because of the Lewis Walker Institute, he will be here on Western's campus. Shout out to the Lewis Walker Institute. I gotta do a plug for them because I love them very much. Benjamin Dixon found a clip of Mayor Bloomberg giving a speech. And he was giving a speech about why stop and frisk was effective and why more cops are in black neighborhoods. He's using this justification. This wasn't back in 1970. This was while he was mayor. This is like 2015. This is one of the most disgusting things I've seen. And is reason number 6,452 why it's disgusted me when I saw Joy Reid say, hey, Mayor Bloomberg was a former Republican. He's an former independent. So that's good for him and for the Democratic Party. She said that after Bernie won New Nevada. And they've been slandering Bernie because he's not a Democrat. He's to the left of the party.
By the way, before we play the clip, I think that speaks to, like, you're starting to see this more and more. The Democratic pundits and, like, MSNBC-style pundits seem to have a very unique and fanciful idea of who independents are in the United. Now that they're actually recognizing them and that they come into play.
Oh, it's not just them. It's also CNN.
Yeah, it's like, which candidate polls best with independents? Can you remind me, Lawrence?
It's Bernie, bro.
Yeah.
It was the people who
even polls a lot of conservative independents because he genuinely wants to quote unquote fight the man.
The people who had the most crossover votes in this election is Bernie, Tulsi, and Yang. It was Bernie, Tulsi, and Yang. Now, I don't even agree with Tulsi and Yang's positions majority of the time, but they had people coming to the Democratic Party because of their policy ideas. Now, and also, Tulsi went on Hannity recently and said some garbage, which we also need to talk about. Because Tulsi, Jesus Christ.
I think, too, it's worth pointing out, even sometimes we've seen people support candidates like Bernie, even if they don't agree with the policies, because, and this plays out, this is a very important thing that plays out in elections. It played out in 2016 in its own weird, sort of warped way, but this idea that, like, I'm for this candidate, not because I disagree with some of their policies, but I can tell that they are against the establishment and they are not full of I'm not going to say the word on air, but they're not full of doo-doo.
Look at the Joe Rogan semi-endorsement. Joe Rogan didn't fully endorse Bernie, but listen to the reason why he said it. He was like, if you take what somebody said, somebody in anyone in the world, there's something that they said, take it out of context, and it was at one of their low moments. You could shame and cancel culture anybody because we've all had those moments. Bernie doesn't have many of those moments, and also, he said also he believes what he says. He's a genuine person. Like, even if you don't agree with him, he's trying to fight for you. So, but anyway.
All right, so back to this. Let's play this clip.
So I need everybody to remember. This is in 2015. This is when he was mayor. This is still during his tenure. I need you to remember that Michael Bloomberg. Listen to the talking points and the justification that he's about to use for these disgusting policies that he's about to talk about. This also is coming. This isn't coming from the this isn't coming from the Benjamin Dixon show. This is actually coming from the Majority Report. The clip that we're using. Shout out to the Majority Report. But listen to this nonsense.
Murderers and murder victims.
Says 95% of your murderers and murder victims going forward.
1 MO.
You can just take the description, Xerox it, and pass it out to all the cops. They are male, minority, 15 to 25. That's true in New York, it's true in virtually every city in the United States. And that's where the real crime is. You've got to get the guns out of the hands of the people that are getting killed. So you want to spend the money, put a lot of cops in the street, put those cops where the crime is, which means in the minority neighborhoods. So it's one of the unintended consequences is people say, oh my God, you are arresting kids for marijuana that are all minorities. Yes, that's true. Why? Because we put all the cops in the minority neighborhoods. Yes, that's true. Why we do it? Because that's where all the crime is. And the way you get the guns out of the kids' hands is to throw them against the wall and frisk them. And then they say, oh, I don't want that. I don't want to get caught, so they don't bring the gun. They still have a gun, but they leave it at home.
So, listen to that argument. 90% of crimes are coming. You can say
that was Mayor Bloomberg, by the way.
Yeah, this is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg. Was using to justify stop and frisk. He said that all the people who are committing a crime, you could Xerox copy a picture of the same person. It is a minority between the age of 16 and 30 and 24. Or whatever the age range he said. He said that they're the ones that's causing the majority of the crimes. They're the ones that are hurting folks. So we have to violate their human rights and their constitutional rights and throw them against the wall and frisk them. Because even if they don't have a gun on them while they're walking down the street, they have it at home. So we're going to assume guilt on them. So let's take this to its logical conclusion. If we're gonna if that's gonna be the standard, fair enough. So when Wall Street destroyed the global economy, right? When Wall Street destroyed our country and destroyed the global economy, we could send police officers to go into JP Morgan Chase and to Citigroup and to Goldman Sachs and throw these people against the wall, check their phones without a warrant. We could search their pockets, check their laptops because they destroyed our economy. That's okay. That's justified that these white, affluent people destroyed our economy so the police can go and do that. That's the justification that is using. That a group of people in our country are doing crimes.
By the way, if Lawrence's example sounds fanciful to you, keep in mind it is in most of the world, except they actually did do that in Iceland because they actually have some sense and people have a little bit more control over their government than they do here.
No, but I'm saying you can apply that. If we're going to apply that same logic, cool. The overwhelming majority of people that do mass shootings in this country are white men.
Oh, and statistically, most of the people selling marijuana are also white men. So to get back to the actual metrics of the example, Bloomberg is using.
So if we're going to use that logic, so that means that the cops should stop, harass, and violate the constitutional rights of every white man that they see in New York City. That's okay because we have to stop the crime. And if they don't have the gun on them, they probably have the gun at their house because we are assuming guilt on them.
Yeah, not to mention, I think and again, what really boils my blood is people like Bloomberg. He was an austerity politician. He was all about tightening the purse and cutting social programs in New York City, while at the same time saying it's just people might think it's racist, but we got to do it. This is how we have to police. This is how we will lower crime in these neighborhoods. Neighborhoods that you strip mine from having public resources that would prevent and lower crime rates in these neighborhoods.
This is the kicker. I'm glad you said something. Yeah. Guess what happened when he threatened to get rid of stop and frisk? Crime rates went down.
Yeah.
Guess what happens when he stopped over policing black and brown minority communities? The crime rates went down.
No SHI.
So even with his own logic, while he was running New York, His policy was a failure. He knew that. He chose to continue to do it anyway. Why? Because he's an authoritarian by nature.
One of my, well, I shouldn't say favorite, but like Michael Tracy. I don't really agree with a lot of stuff he says, but he had a very poignant tweet that just stuck with me right after Bloomberg announced, and he brought up the fact, it's like, I will remember Bloomberg's style of politics when he ordered the forced evacuation of Zuccotti Park. Those who were there remember the violent way that Occupy New York ended the crackdowns. Like I heard horror stories. A local activist, I won't call him out by name, but told me like stories about like people's dogs being thrown in trash compactors and like it was just brutal and senseless the way that Occupy Wall Street ended in New York City, and you can put the blame, the decision making about how that happened at Mayor Bloomberg's feet.
Not like, and to add to that, who was he serving when he chose to do those policies? Who is he serving when he chooses to do stop and frisk? He's not choosing to serve the brown and black people who live in his city. He's not choosing to represent them as their representative, because that's hurting their community. Yep. When he cracked down on Occupy Wall Street, did he choose to crack down on Wall Street, the people who stole their homes in the first place? No,
because he's one of them. He's one of the 1%. You know?
No.
Yeah.
And this is also a reason why I'm glad you said that, because you saw Nina Turner argue with Jacob Johnson about the word oligarch.
Oh yeah.
And how Bloomberg is an oligarch. Bernie has $2 million because he sold a book. Mm-hmm. Bloomberg has $66 billion. Mm-hmm. Bloomberg has spent $300 million in advertising alone.
It just boils that Bloomberg is set. I mean, I'm just going to say this real quick. Thing that just makes everybody so mad about Bloomberg, he is an example of the kind of privileged entitlement and a-hole behavior that draw people to candidates like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, because literally the reason he's running is because he saw that the two people who were polling so consistently well, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, might actually increase his taxes. Oh no! So yeah, he's got to do this like left flank. I'm just gonna like buy ads everywhere, run for president, which sadly is working to a certain extent. You know, his poll numbers are going up.
And that's the point that I'm trying to get to. A millionaire, like there's a difference between a millionaire and a billionaire. A millionaire can still go to jail because they bribe a coach at a university to let their child play on their team. A millionaire can still millionaires have gone to jail doing that. A billionaire will call and buy a part of the school. Will tell the dean of the president of the school, yo, I don't like this policy, you need to change it. And it will get done. Bloomberg has spent $300 million on advertising. Let me also remind everybody who's listening to this. Flint water system. It only costs $55 million to fix. Bloomberg has spent about 6 times as much money as it would cost to fix the water pipes in a city. Bernie has $2 million. Even if you timed his money by 6, he would have what? He would have $12 million. He wouldn't even come close.
No, for real.
It's not the same, folks. Mm-hmm. It's not the same.
Yeah.
Bloomberg also the other things that makes this dude a troglodyte. He was against Fight for 15. Mm-hmm. He's against Medicare for All. He said legalizing marijuana is the most ignorant thing that he's ever heard. Those 3 things, just those 3 things alone, poll over 60%. They poll over 60%. They poll over 70% in the Democratic base. He does not agree with them. He does not support them. He was a Republican who supported George W. Bush in the Iraq War, a war that we're still in today. He also gave money to Republican senators that ended up swaying the vote, that ended up making sure that the Republicans kept control of the Senate, and they're the reason why Kavanaugh's in office today. I mean, he's a judge today. Bloomberg gave money to vulnerable Republicans so they kept their seat, and those vulnerable Republicans voted for Brett Kavanaugh. You can blame that seat because of Bloomberg.
Yeah, and I also wanted to bring up, while we were on the Bloomberg train, former co-host Nora sent us this bit of information. It's from LGBTQ Nation. Headline is, Mike Bloomberg said trans rights are about some man wearing a dress, using a locker room with girls. And I'm just going to read a quick excerpt from this article. A video has surfaced of Bloomberg responding to a question about Brexit by saying that people who live in the Midwest are too uneducated to understand transgender equality. He said, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the bathroom issue in the United States. It goes on to say, if you want to know if somebody is a good salesman, give them the job of going to the Midwest and picking a town and selling to the town the concept that some man wearing a dress should be in a locker room with their daughter. He said, if you can sell that, you can sell anything. Basically said the idea of transgender women using bathrooms and other facilities with underage girls, with the implication that trans women will molest children, is one of the most consistently used attacks on transgender rights by the religious right. He then imagined a conversation between a hypothetical Oxford scholar and somebody from flyover country. He said, I mean, they just look at you and they say, what on earth are you talking about? And you say, well, this person identifies his or his gender is different than what's on their birth certificate. And they say, what do you mean? You're born either this or that. So anyway, he goes on to say, it's just this really bad faith argument that people don't understand transgender issues, and that, like, to actually stand up for their rights is like an electoral liability. And that's just, God, it's so gross.
One more thing before we get off Bloomberg. This is the last thing I just want to talk about Bloomberg. While he was running New York, the Central Park 5 case was the Central Park 5 victims were supposed to get restitution for being in jail under false charges, and they were wrongly imprisoned. Mayor Bloomberg fought against giving those brothers their restitution. He spent $6 million of taxpayers' money to not pay these brothers to not pay these brothers and give them justice. That's Mayor Bloomberg. He is a troglodyte. And the fact that you have people who call themselves liberals, or people who are being hoodwinked, they're being swindled by his ads. Now, if you're a low information voter, you're not a political junkie like we are, okay, cool. But if you're a political pundit on MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, and you have more resources than me and Andy, you have more resources than we ever have, and you are not talking about that context, you are doing propaganda. You are exactly what Noam Chomsky talked about when he talked about manufacturing consent. You are part of the problem.
So I think let's go ahead and go to a quick break. When we get back, we still got a lot of stuff to talk about here on the show. Again, we got more stuff to talk about the primary. I did want to touch on some stories about Palestine. Maybe there's another local story we might have time to hit on. So
I just want to scream and shout. You know, Bernie won New Hampshire, and no one is. We need to talk about that some more. Yeah. But Bernie won New Hampshire, and the mainstream media is literally trying to say, hey, if you add up Amy Klobuchar and Mayor Pete, then they actually won. That's not how it works. That's not how it works.
Oh, well, we'll talk about media bias in a sec. But
yeah.
Y'all listen to the Hoodrat Strategist radio program only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
Hi, this is Will from Imperial Teen, and you're listening to 89.1 FM, WIDR, Kalamazoo, Radio Evolution.
Voting is important. From deciding Kalamazoo's best drunk food to picking the fan favorite for Wider's Battle of the Bands, voting allows people to voice their opinions and change their world. To vote for offices such as mayors, senators, and the president takes a little more than a link to a Google Forms survey. Before you vote, you have to register. This can be done in person, by mail, and, in many states, online. For more information, you can point your favorite web browser to vote.gov.
All right, we're back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. And I don't know, Lord, did you want me to mention this Berrien County nonsense real quick or go back to the primary?
No. Look, Berrien County, I need y'all to come to the front of the church. I need every single person who is talking this nonsense to come to the front of the congregation and sit on the first pew next to Jesus.
So let me explain the nonsense, and me and Lawrence will comment on it real quick. So if you want to read the full article, I'm only going to read a couple of bits from it. Gun rights resolution up for consideration in Berrien County.
This is coming from M Live, by the way.
Kayla Miller published it on February 11th. So the Berrien County Board of Commissioners expected to discuss a draft resolution of support for the constitutional right to bear arms at its upcoming Thursday, February 13th meeting, according to county officials. Each Berrien County Commissioner took an oath of office under which we swore to protect the Constitution of the United States and the Michigan Constitution. This is from county staff. This is what the document states. It is the desire of this board to declare its support of the Second Amendment. Discussions began after Jim Walker, a Village of Barada resident, asked commissioners to consider a resolution titled Second Amendment Sanctuary County in an email sent to the board on January 10th. The board also received about 75 emails from citizens voicing support for the proposed resolution. Walker requested commissioners declare the county a sanctuary county and that the board affirm its support of the sheriff and the prosecutor's office in the exercise of their sound discretion to not enforce any citizen an unconstitutional firearms law. Lawrence, I'll let you say what you got to say about this, and then I have a couple things to say about it myself.
I mean, cool. Cool. You want St. Joe and Ben Harbor to walk around with their guns? So you're telling me that the state police and the local police is not going to harass black folks if they are walking around with 12 gauges and AR-15s and long barrel rifles?
Yeah, that's fine.
We're gonna sit here and act like they're not going to be harassed first for having weapons, or that the justification for killing them is because they had quote unquote a weapon on them. We're gonna act like that's not the case. We're gonna okay. So question. Like, look, I understand there's a lot of hunters in that area. I get that. I have family and friends that live down there that are hunters. You know what I'm saying? That's cool. But what is this resolution and all this? Who is this helping? Who is this going to support? And who is this going to put in danger?
I think as far as helping conservative white people's feelings for 600, Alex.
Dog, they are really trying to get people shot. Like, this is that's the only thing I can think of. Because I'm like, that's the only thing I can think of is that, like, they're gonna turn Berrien County into Baghdad, dog. Like,
so I'll just tell you like my take on this. And again, like, if you're a regular listener to the show, you know, like, this is one of the few issues me and Lawrence kind of have some disagreements on. But here's what I'm disgusted about. Here's what I think makes it ridiculous. As somebody who is like, you know, kind of like, you go far enough left, you get your guns back, blah blah blah. Here's one thing that disgusts me, like a Second Amendment sanctuary city. This is something I've seen from some other conservative, like pro-gun activists around the country. It's appropriating language from immigrant rights struggles in a very intentional way. It kind of reminds me of all lives matter.
It is exactly all lives, blue lives matter. It is exactly that. It is to take away from those who are actually trying to fight for equality for those who are being oppressed, and you're going to say that your right to defend yourself is being oppressed when it's not.
Quantifiably not. That's what grosses me out about it. It's like the need to give undocumented people a safe place from government oppression. That's a real problem. The government is owned by people in the gun lobby. To say that the Second Amendment or whatever is you know, in danger in the same way like undocumented people are, that's insensitive and it's untrue. It's completely separate from reality. And I'd also say too, like, it's also dangerous. These are the same people, the people who are like fearful about the government legislation forcing law enforcement to take away people's guns. This is the same line of reasoning that was divorced from reality. Put Lee Carter in danger, the Democratic Socialist state rep from Virginia. They threatened his life over an issue very similar to this. And I also just think, like, it's white fragility. You know, even the people in the quote-unquote pro-gun left, like, we don't fetishize guns the same way the right wing does. It's like they're tools, like anything else. And this idea that we need, like, a county resolution to talk about how much we like our guns is just, it's some white foolishness.
No, here's the thing though. When when we talk about this, like, yes, we have certain disagreements on this issue, but me and you both have come to the same conclusion. When they say that they're going to use their guns to fight back against a tyrannical government, okay, cool. What does that logically mean? That logically means that you're saying you're going to turn your weapons on the police.
I would also say if you wanted to stockpile weapons to fight a tyrannical government, you're a few hundred years too late.
But that's my point. When they say we're going to use these weapons to defend ourselves from a tyrannical government, all that stuff, they're literally saying, with all intents and purposes, I'm waiting for the day where I can use my guns on police and military. So, the whole respect the military, Blue Lives Matter, all that stuff. These same gun nuts are waiting to shoot you, the police officers and military folks who are supposed to be protecting and serving us. And what's going to end up happening is that you're going to see a lot more justifications of ignorance. People having guns in bars, people having guns at daycares, people having guns at basketball stadiums and football stadiums. We've already passed concealed carry laws like that. Mm-hmm. It's the what could possibly go wrong law, right? Yeah. And we've seen what happens. People get shot. More people get shot. And we are not living in Die Hard.
That's in the data too, man. Like that's that whole good guy with a gun fantasy. Like sometimes it works, but that's like statistically. I'm glad. No, it doesn't work.
I'm glad you brought that up because the FBI statistic, they did 2 different studies of this. There was one that was done between 2012 and 2015, and one that was done later after that. I was actually talking to when I had my interview with Mr. Johnson about it. The average good guy with a gun, the good Samaritan with a gun, the average number of times that they have stopped a mass shooting is 12%. Mm-hmm. It's between 9 and 12%. So we're talking about 9 to 12%. So what happened in that other 88%? One of 4 things happened. Either the Good Samaritan was shot by the mass shooter. The Good Samaritan ran away. Mm-hmm. The Good Samaritan shot a civilian because they tried to shoot the mass shooter. Or the Good Samaritan got shot by the police because the police thought that the Good Samaritan was the mass shooter.
And I think it's important, too, to bring up, like, how firearms can be used as a deterrence, particularly by the left. It isn't this idea that we're going to become action movie heroes when the bad guy shows up. It's basically a good example, like how the Black Panthers used it symbolically. Like, we're going to open carry because it is our right to do this under the law. And also, it basically sends a very explicit message. It's like, you cannot just harass and assault and kill us with no consequence. We have a right to defend ourselves. And that's how a lot of like lefty gun clubs, that's the way they operate.
That's also why Ronald Reagan, who was the governor at the time, passed comprehensive gun legislation in California.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but if you have a mass shooter who ostensibly doesn't care if they're going to live or die, then that's not going to matter if you have like 100 people open carrying with guns, and that goes back to like cultural alienation. What also
happens? Suicide rates also go up because a large portion of people that try to commit suicide, but they commit suicide trying to use pills or something like that, they're unsuccessful. When they use a gun, they usually are. Exactly. So accidental shootings, suicides, all those things also go up as well. There's a statistic in our country that once a week a toddler, someone who is 5 and younger, has either shot a gun and hurt somebody or they were shot. Mm-hmm. That's an actual statistic from our government. Mm-hmm. That we live in a country where toddlers are shot once a week.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right, so we've got about 20 minutes left in the program. Want to make sure we still got some ground to cover with the primary, and I want to also make sure we cover some international news that doesn't get a whole lot of attention. I want to make sure that our coverage doesn't just focus exclusively on primary stuff. But
we have to talk about this peace deal and God, Jesus.
Oh man. So let's talk a little bit about there's some corruption some conflict of interest with the Mayo Pete campaign. I'm going to read, this is a good article. It's from like a local new NBC affiliate in Las Vegas. Voters concerned over Nevada Democratic Party hires former Buttigieg campaign staffer. I'll give you the context here. Less than 2 weeks out from the Nevada caucus and less than a week after the disastrous Iowa caucus, it was revealed that Emily Goldman, identified as a former staffer of the Pete Buttigieg campaign in multiple screenshots of her social media profiles, has been hired by the state party. After Iowa, an incredibly tight race between Bernie Sanders and Buttigieg, the second caucus, a lot of attention has returned to Nevada. Among concerns about a disaster like the one in Iowa, some Nevadans are now worried about the recent hire and what it means for impartiality in the voting results. This is basically going on. The statement from the party to News 3 down in Las Vegas said, we have many... Here's the thing. They're trying to reassure us that this just sounds worse. We have many former campaign staffers and volunteers working to protect the integrity of this caucus, including people from the Harris, Sanders, and Warren's campaign. It is not unusual or uncommon for this to happen. That's not how you're supposed to do it.
Lies.
Even if that, whether that's truth or a lie, that's not how you do this stuff. Let me give you a perfect concrete example. So, voters, not politicians, they're hiring people now to be the committee that does redistricting. And they're seeking Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And even with the Democrats and the Republicans, they specify if you've been a paid staffer for or like overt supporter for a particular candidate, or you've been part of like the party's actual like paid staff, then you are not eligible to be on this board. And the reason is because they want to minimize bias as much as possible when you're in these very sensitive areas, when you're going to be determining the integrity and equity behind a state's elections. Nevada's Democratic Party is basically saying, nah, we don't care. I'm sure it'll be impartial regardless, even if we do hire the supporters and staff from campaigns that are running in this election.
I mean... this makes Iowa look competent. Like, like, dog. Remember, I'm glad they're not using the Shadow app at least, but this is the same thing that we complain about in Iowa. And this is also the same thing that we were complaining about with Bloomberg. You had in Iowa, you had Clinton staffers designing the app that they were using to count the votes. The app legitimately miscounting the votes. You had Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg paying for the app. So you had people who are running the race paying for the thing that's going to determine if they win or not. Mm-hmm. And then when they are called out saying that these things are incorrect, their argument recently, and this was reported in Sludge and in the Intercept and also in Jacobin, that they said we cannot change the mistakes on the paperwork for the integrity's sake of the process and document. So they're saying they have to keep the information wrong because it will ruin the process and the document because it's a governmental document. Forgetting the fact that it's wrong, you have to correct it so that we can have the truth.
Yeah, I mean,
so by that logic, by that logic. So if you're a Bernie Sanders supporter and you are a caucus head, caucus chair or something, just write that your district gives out a million points and give it to whoever that you want. You know what I'm saying? Like, say, and let's see if they'll change it because, for the sake of the integrity.
And I just
the process.
Yeah, one last little thing I want to read here too. So, Fayez Shakir, who's one of Faz Shakir,
who runs Justice Democrats.
Yep.
Shout out.
Also one of the campaign managers for Bernie Sanders' campaign. So he released a statement. He said, "We've spoken with the Nevada Party, which has assured us that this individual does not have decision-making authority over the caucus count. Please know we are working hard with the party to get every assurance that mistakes of Iowa are not repeated." Her little job description here says, Voter Protection Director. Now, if you're the voter protection director, like, what is your job if it's not going to interact with anything? Like, I get it. The Sanders campaign has to be diplomatic and, like, it's like basically their line has to be the process is fair and we're blah, 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 blah. But it's just like, how is that not like a conflict of interest where she could tilt the scales when she is the voter protection director for the state of Nevada? Like, what's her job description if, like, she's that, but she's not actually going to interact with the caucus votes in any way?
That is 100% unfiltered garbage. That's what that is.
Oh, yeah.
That's 100% just trash.
And then I wanted to talk about a different kind of bias that it doesn't really come from, actually tinkering with the vote or the process. But I think it brings up an important point. We're usually very pro-union on the show, but we do make a distinction that, there's unions and then there's unions. Something that's going into Nevada. This is from a really great Intercept article. It's pretty expansive. It goes into a lot of really good data. With New Hampshire behind him, Sanders looks to Nevada workers as Vegas union bosses rally against him. It's written by Ada Chavez and Lee Fong, published on February 11th. And I want to focus just on this union part. 2020, so Nevada is considered the first real test of a presidential candidate's appeal to voters of color. Latinos make up almost a third of the state's population, and Sanders is counting on strong support from the voting bloc to carry him to victory. Biden, meanwhile, ditched his own primary night in New Hampshire to head over to South Carolina. At the same time, the leadership of the powerful Casino Workers Culinary Union, Unite Here Local 226, ramped up its attacks against Sanders on Tuesday with English and Spanish language flyers, texts, and emails to its 60,000 members. Anyway,
it's almost like those who are in control of power don't want to give up power over the people that they're supposed to be representing and serving.
Yep. It goes on to say, just finish this and then we can check it. The Culinary Union, which is mostly made up of women and Latinos, has been actively discouraging support for Sanders and Warren over Medicare for All, warning its members that a single-payer plan would end their quote-unquote health care. Chuck Rocha, a senior Sanders advisor, said the campaign has been reaching out to culinary workers directly. There was another important point. I think it was talking about the union leadership. But I think this goes back to understanding that there are certain radical unions that do have workers' interests at heart, but a lot of them are susceptible to corporate capture. Their leadership is more negotiating on behalf of the bosses than the workers. I'd recommend every check out a book. It's called, if you can find it, the death of the Actually, I'll look up that book and you continue your talking.
It goes back to the reason why they're doing this. Now, this is the dirty secret that a lot on the left don't talk about. Unions make a lot of money by giving health care to their workers. And this is a lot of this why some unions are against Medicare for All, because it will be cutting into their profits. But as the GM workers, how did that work out? Because when the GM workers wanted to went on strike for better pay and better health care, the CEO cut their health care and their pay while they were striking.
These are like bad faith arguments. Yeah, these union stewards should be ashamed for pushing them. Really.
So the idea is that the CEO can snap their fingers and you ain't got health care, you ain't got no check, you ain't getting paid, and you're not getting the demands that you're asking for is not being heard. Because they literally control your life. If you had Medicare for all, then you wouldn't have to negotiate your health care with your employer anymore. That money that was being taken out of your check every week would be going back to you, not to the company, back to you, and you will be and your medical insurance would be covered. So the only thing that you will have to argue with the only thing that you have to have a conversation with when it comes to your bosses is better hours and better wages.
Yeah, exactly.
So the thing that makes that disingenuous is that those union leaders are literally hurting. Those union leaders are literally hurting the men and women that they're supposed to be serving, because they want to make sure that they're keeping that money and keeping that influence over those that they're supposed to be supporting.
Yeah, exactly.
They have literally turned into the thing that they're fighting.
And this happens a lot. This happens at the local level too. Dave Anderson got some union endorsements going into his election, and he's literally like, if there is an emissary of the 1% in our city government, it's bingo dino DNA.
I cannot believe you said that.
Hey, I'm a 90s kid.
I'm a 90s kid too.
Yeah.
But Jesus Christ, bro! Like you gonna start singing Darkwing Duck and Bonkers? You know what I'm saying?
I'm sorry.
Were we? No. I was like, are we gonna? No, I can't get mad at you because I still sing the theme song to Animaniacs. Yeah. So I mean, like, I'm
sorry. That was an insult to those dinosaurs were powerful feminist icons.
Oh,
and I shouldn't compare them to our current mayor.
Oh wow.
Okay, so like I said, I think let's go ahead and I wanted to transition to let's talk about Palestine again. And these two stories I'm going to touch on them briefly. They're interrelated. And I want you to understand they both come in the backdrop of the Trump administration trying to push this new peace deal that really gives no peace to Palestinians, gives everything to Israel, including their ability to keep snatching up Palestinian land.
Doug, I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is literally the thing that we've argued on the show before. It's like, okay, you don't want a two-state solution. It's like, okay, we're not going to argue to have a two-state solution so that both sides can live in peace and have human rights. Okay, cool. So we all agree that violence is not the issue. Violence is a issue, and that neither side should be doing it. So that leaves the last thing. If we're not going to listen. And the other thing was, when Palestinians go to international court, Israel shoots it down, and the United States backs them on shooting down their terms that they want to have. So what's the last thing that the Palestinians get as a solution? Hey, enjoy your subjugation.
Yeah,
that's literally what this is.
So I wanted to read. I'm just going to briefly read some brief excerpts from these two articles because I think they juxtapose each other really well, in the sense that, like, it kind of shows this is what Israel is doing, and then this is the American response to it. So this first article, and they're both from Mint Press News. This one, gruesome details emerge of Israel's torture of Palestinian prisoners. It was published on February 12th by Whitney Webb. I'm just going to kind of read. This is the allegation. Latest cases involve 3 Palestinian men who were detained as part of an extensive manhunt that followed an August 23rd bombing that killed an Israeli settler and teenager, Rina Schnurb. The 3 men living in the occupied West Bank were detained by per Israel's controversial practice of administrative detention, whereby Israel may detain an individual for months or even years without charging them with a crime. The lawyers and family members of the three main suspects have asserted that all three men suspected of links to the bombing had been tortured to the point of needing hospitalization, with one of them admitted for kidney failure and 11 broken ribs before subsequently being returned to the custody of Israeli interrogators. Another of the men had his genitals bitten by a security dog, while the third man was wheelchair bound and unrecognizable to his wife when he appeared in the courtroom. While these three Palestinian men's experiences are extreme cases, the same Shin Bet investigation also tortured several other detainees in less severe ways, but nonetheless left them traumatized. These detainees were released after weeks in detention when never charged. Shin Bet also arrested family members of detainees and in some cases paraded them in front of detainees in order to create the impression that their wives and children would also undergo the same harsh treatment. So all of these, I'm pretty sure, are legal under any sort of international law you can think of. And this article goes into depth with more statistics and kind of a broader context of the increase in these sorts of tactics by the Israeli government. I want to juxtapose that with another article. This was published February 10th, written by Alan McLeod, also Mint Press News. Again, please look up both of these articles. They go into larger depth. Journalist Abby Martin sues state of Georgia over law requiring Pledge of Allegiance to Israel.
Yeah.
Yep. And
Abby Martin, again, doing the Lord's work. Mm-hmm. Yes, Abby. Yes. Thank you.
And I'm just going to read the first three paragraphs here. The state of Georgia shut down a media literacy conference featuring journalist and filmmaker Abby Martin at Georgia Southern University. There's a documentary critical of the Israeli government called Gaza Fights for Freedom. You should all check it out. It's really good. Now she's suing the state, claiming the decision is a violation of the First Amendment, along with the Council on American-Israeli Relations and the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund. Today, she filed a federal free speech lawsuit against the University System of Georgia. She said, "This censorship of my talk based on forced compliance to anti-BDS laws in Georgia is just one level of a nationwide campaign to protect Israel from grassroots pressure. We must stand firmly opposed to these efforts and not cower in fear to these blatant violations of free speech. 28 states so far have already mandated loyalty pledges to Israel as a means to outlaw dissent." In December, President Trump passed legislation effectively criminalizing the boycott, divestments, and sanctions movement. Now, again, we got to touch on the irony that Abby Martin was there at the university to talk about anti-BDS laws. She was banned from speaking out of it because of anti-BDS laws.
Right. So we are censoring Americans. We are taking away their First Amendment speech. We're taking away their right to dissent, to protect an authoritarian right-wing government that is not ours. Another country's right-wing government. And we believe that just using your speech or saying that don't want to support businesses that treat other human beings like second-class citizens or treat other human beings inhumanely is a threat. It's a threat. This journalist, Abby Martin, cannot do her job, which is to tell the truth and inform the American people, because of our government wanting to protect the power of a right-wing authoritarian government.
Yeah, one that is just flagrantly and out in the open. Like, this sounds a lot like you remember, Lawrence, back when the torture report first dropped. It was huge and scandalous, at least for a little while. This up to and exceeds anything I read from that, and yet. Apart from Mint Press News, which is like kind of an underground kind of grassroots funded news organization, like I haven't heard anything about this on MSNBC or CNN, certainly not Fox News. Yet at the same time, who does our government target? Journalists who are telling the truth.
Man, telling the truth is one of the greatest war crimes in American history right now.
It really is. It definitely gets treated as such. That is for sure. All right. So, again, I really recommend all of y'all check out those 2 articles. Again, the first one I mentioned, gruesome details emerge of Israel's torture of Palestinian prisoners. Second article, journalist Abby Martin sues state of Georgia over law requiring pledge of allegiance to Israel. So I think it's about 8 o'clock right now. Going to wrap things up. Last couple weeks, I haven't done the activist calendar. We were kind of just running out of time. I will make sure to let y'all know real quick. You got stuff coming up this week. Let's see. It looks like Saturday. Well, that's a candidate thing. I don't know if I want to mention that. We got it. We are impartial here.
We also got to talk about. All right, one last thing. One quick hit. Roger Stone should be going to jail for 50 years.
Oh, yeah.
And President Numbnuts is deciding to commute his sentence, or is making waves to say that his sentence should be shorter. And because of this, the people that were prosecuting Roger Stone, 4 of them quit as a sign of protest. Because President Trump has been on a tweet storm saying, y'all shouldn't lock up my friend. Y'all shouldn't lock up my friend. And I have the right. I have a right to commute a sentence. I'm not gonna get involved though. I'm not gonna get involved.
Like, I could, but I won't.
I could, but I'm not. Like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding? One, Roger Stone broke the law.
Yep, he did.
He broke the law.
Very plain and simply. That's
like, Trump also broke the law. He should also be held accountable for it. But, bruh, Roger Stone, let Roger Stone with his Nixon tattoo that he has as a tramp stamp go to jail. Let him get all the things that he deserves.
Oh, yeah. So the only 2 events I really want to tell you all about going into next week. On Sunday, February 16th at 4 p.m. over at the Galilee Baptist Church, they're having the 6th annual service of remembrance for victims of gun violence. And then at 6:30 p.m. on Monday, February 17th at the Fountain Street Church, Heading for Extinction, the talk with Paul Lafayette. He's somebody who's involved in the Extinction Rebellion. It's going to be a lecture. So check those out. You get a chance. Again,
send me that calendar, man. I need that. I don't have it. I need it.
I will do. So I want to just let y'all know, thanks again for tuning into the program. Again, you can find all of our episodes on YouTube after the fact. Until next time, everybody out there, keep on fighting for that revolution solution.